Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. Today I'm going to be doing my 200k Q&A. A little bit late, but I've been on holiday with the family recently. Haven't been uploading as much, but we're back into the swing of things now. I put the feelers out there and you guys asked me some fantastic questions, and this is going to be a good one, I'm sure of it. Last time I did a Q&A, it was at 20k, and I had to get my brother to send me in questions so I didn't look like a loser. So thank you guys for asking questions this time. But just before we get there, guys, just want to give a massive thank you to everybody who has helped me out by subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, jumping in the live premieres when they're on and chatting with me, and also all of my locals, supporters, much appreciated. I could not do this without you guys, and I absolutely love the community we are building here. So big things to come. Let's get into it. First question is from Jonathan Perez. If you could interview one person, living or dead, who would it be? For me, it would be Hunter S. Thompson. He's an old school journalist. He's the guy who was sort of the first gonzo journalist. He went and lived with the Hells Angels for a little while. He wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and he was just a cool guy and a reverent figure and someone that was massively inspiring for me. So probably be Hunter S. Ricky Collins, what were your political leanings, beliefs before you started paying attention and informing yourself about politics? Actually, I was a liberal atheist. So I went to university for a few years, didn't finish, absolutely hated it. But basically, I remember even as much as 2020, I was a massive Bernie Sanders supporter, and I was thought that climate change was the biggest issue facing humanity. And then I would say it was probably listening to a few of the guests on Rogan that started to make way too much sense to me, such as Jordan Peterson and guys like that eventually just swayed me and just changed my mind. So, and of course the pandemic completely opened up my eyes, and now here we are. Rita Fernandez, how did you first get interested in debates and analyzing them? I've actually been interested in this stuff for quite a while. I always enjoyed watching debates, and I enjoyed watching people who are really good at debates. But over the last few years, before I started doing YouTube full time, even when I was working a job and when I was a full-time personal trainer and when I worked in recruitment for a little while, basically in all my spare time, this is all I would do, was watch videos about culture and politics and debates and that sort of thing. So it's been something that's been bubbling up for a while, and then it kind of seemed like a seamless transition into the channel, if that makes sense. Gucci44, what eating routine / diet did you use to lose weight? I actually just started boxing, and I was 19 at the time. I used to be 110 kilos, for you guys who don't know. And I moved to London when I was 19, and I met my boxing coach through a security guard at my work. And then we just clicked, we got on really well. And then I'd lost my dad pretty recently before that. So he was kind of like a father figure to me. And then I just never wanted to let him down. So I'd come to boxing 3, 4, 5 times a week, training really hard. And I was working a really physical job at the time in a warehouse. So for those 3 years, I was just training. I was working a lot. And when you're like young, 19, 20, 21 like that, it's much easier to lose weight. But nowadays, whenever I go to Italy for a few weeks, as I've just done, the best thing to do for me is intermittent fasting. So I always skip breakfast, and then I'm just cognizant about what I eat for lunch and dinner. If I was to start again, and if I didn't know what I was doing, or if I was personal training someone, like I've done many times, I'd try my best to understand macronutrients. So carbs, proteins, and fats. You can quite easily get your BMI, your body weight, your height. You can go into macro calculator on the internet, and you can figure out how much carbs, fats, and proteins you need to be eating. And then you can get MyFitnessPal, which is an app, and you can just make a meal plan. You can punch in all of the meals, and it will tell you your macronutrient splits, and you can figure it out. And then after a while of doing that, eventually you start to just kind of know. You start to just sort of inherently know every time you eat a meal, and every time a day finishes, for that matter, if you're over your macros or not. So it's one of those things that it just takes a little while. It takes a bit of learning, but eventually you get into your own rhythm, you understand your body, you understand what works for you, and it's a great thing. RTrip88, what is your favorite Douglas Murray clip ever? That would definitely have to be the one where he absolutely annihilated Malcolm Gladwell, because it was just the mainstream media and the smugness and these people who are really elitist and look down on the unintelligent, unwashed peasants. And then you get a guy like Douglas Murray who comes and just knocks him off his high horse with ease for everyone to see. It was a beautiful thing. That's definitely my favorite. Fiona Kane, what do you believe are the skills required to do it well like Douglas Murray? Well, to do it like Douglas Murray, you'd need to be extremely learned. He obviously is a very well-read man, and he's practiced his writing skills over many years. And then when you write something enough, eventually you become better and better at explaining it. So I'd say writing a lot would really help. And then just working on your conversational skills. I guess just doing some intellectual sparring every now and then. If you've got friends who are into these sorts of things, practicing your tone and your cadence and all of these sorts of things. And there's a channel called Charisma on Command. If you guys don't know that channel, go and check it out because they're amazing at teaching this stuff. And I learned a lot from them. Matthew Larry says, we have a couple of awesome contenders for the Republican ticket that I think would be way better than Trump as POTUS. Who do you think should win? I actually think that Larry Elder is the best candidate of them all. He's just such a beast and he's such a repository of knowledge and wisdom. And I think he'd be a fantastic president, but I also think he'd be an amazing vice president. He'd be a great number two, that guy who's willing to get in and do the grit work. He understands the laws, he understands history, and he has great ideas that would actually affect change. But in terms of the leader, the visionary, the charismatic person, that intoxicant that can really inspire people, it's Trump or Vivek for me. Either of them would be fantastic. I hope Vivek has no skeletons that come out of the closet that we don't know about. But, oh man, that's a good question. It's obviously going to be very, very divisive if Trump comes back into office. Do you want to acquiesce because the media has basically infiltrated people's minds and filled their heads with garbage and made them hate him? Not really. But I do think that Vivek has more of a chance to unite the country. That's what I'd say about that. Amber Julia says, I would love to know about how and when your spiritual beliefs have transformed throughout your life. Were you raised in a particular religion? When did you deviate from that, and why, as you've gotten older, what has made you rethink your stance on religion? So I was born into a family that wasn't particularly religious. I mean, they're Catholic, I guess you could say. I didn't really know anything about it. I wasn't raised with any sort of religious beliefs. I went to a Catholic high school. And, you'd go to church and you'd say all the things, and I was christened and I had my communion and all of these sorts of things, but I never felt any sort of connection to religion. And I actually think that when you're young like that and you're raised and you're sort of made to recite the Our Fathers and the Hail Marys, it all just becomes a little bit bland. It doesn't really mean anything to you. But as I've gotten older, I've started to understand the meaning behind these things. And I've also started to understand how societies tend to deviate from morality when they deviate from religion. So right now, I wouldn't say that I have any particular convictions about religion, but I study it a lot, not trying to force anything, and ask me the question in a year and maybe it'll be different. Garrett Wood says, weird question, but where do you live? I assumed Australia or New Zealand, but in some videos, I see you're in Japan or Western Europe. Finding out why you bounce around like that has been on my list since I started watching. Very insulted by the way that you said New Zealand. Don't ever call an Australian a New Zealander. But with that aside, I live basically around the world at the moment. So I'll normally be in a new country every month. Just the way I like to do things, to be honest. It keeps things fresh. I like to get an Airbnb in a different place. I'm in Budapest at the moment. That actually says rock and roll behind me, but you guys can only see the roll. I'm in Budapest at the moment. I love this city. In a few days' time, I'm going to Turkey. So I'll be in Turkey throughout September. And then I'll be in Thailand throughout October. And that's just the way I like to do it. Like to get isolated, like to put my head down and work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And I just find that if you're in a really nice place, it's more creatively inspiring. And if you're able to work online, why not do it? I mean, if I'm in Australia, everything is really expensive. But if I'm in Thailand, I can spend like $10 a day and have 3 meals a day, train Muay Thai all the time. The weather's nice. There's nice women everywhere. What can I say? It's Eric73 says, do you have some top tier reading recommendations for breaking down debate and negotiation tactics? Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Go and get that book. Gyro Murphy says, aside from the political content, what channels do you watch on YouTube purely for entertainment? I mean, personally, I don't really watch that many channels for entertainment. Everything I watch, I like to have a purpose. I like it to be helping me out in some regard. Like I watch Modern Wisdom a lot, which is Chris Williamson's podcast. I think he's a fantastic interviewer. And there's just a lot of gold in those interviews. I watch Mr. Ballin a lot. Actually, that's probably more entertainment, but I love the way that he tells stories. He's a very charismatic guy, and I actually take a lot of notes about the way that he communicates. More for entertainment, I'd say the Y-Files and 32. Those ones are really cool channels. They're just like weird, obscure stories, and those guys are good storytellers as well. And then for pure entertainment's sake, I'm a big sports fan. So I love the UFC, I love boxing, and I love the English Premier League. So those are the other channels that I'd watch, the highlights of those games. Xeria says, what is your view on spirituality and metaphysics? And can you relate to the idea that a great awakening is taking place, which involves the spiritual evolution of humans taking place right now? Are you immediately hopeful or pessimistic for our future? And have you ever experienced anything mystical or spiritual yourself? All right, it's a deep question. So mystical or spiritual, I was haunted by a ghost once. I won't go into the finer details I have absolutely no question about it. I was in my bed, and it was when I was really young. It was like 10 years old, and my brother and I were sharing a bed on a holiday, and we just had the door keep on slamming shut and open and shut and open, and the bed of the person that we were staying in was the individual whose funeral we were there to attend. So that was creepy. And then the next night, my dad, who was like a stoic, doesn't believe in any ghosts or any of that bullshit, said he didn't believe it, so he's going to sleep in the bed. So the next night, I slept in the same bed with my dad. Exact same stuff happened all night, and he was a believer after that. But in terms of pessimism and optimism, I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I think that the West is in huge, huge trouble, and I think that globalism is really quite bad for the West. Immigration is going to be a massive problem in Europe, and I travel around Europe a lot, guys, and I can see it's already destroying countries in Europe. And then there are other countries like Hungary, like Budapest, like the one I'm in right now, that haven't been affected as much because they've been stricter on immigration. So I'm very pessimistic about Europe, rather pessimistic about the West. I think that the cultural decadence and the atheism and the embrace of socialism and communism and all of these extreme left-wing ideologies is going to be detrimental. I think that the experimentation and the questioning of gender is going to be detrimental. And the cultural decadence is probably at a stage where things will have to get really, really bad before they get better. But if you look around the rest of the world, you've got countries like Georgia, for example, who have embraced zero tax policies. They're trying to get entrepreneurs from around the world. El Salvador is also doing some great things. Countries like Hungary that I'm in right now, Poland, they're very traditional, and they're basically bucking the trend. And there are many places to go in the world where they actually value tradition. And if you're a single man, where the ladies are much, much more traditional and feminine, the governments take pride in keeping the city beautiful and having low taxes and encouraging entrepreneurship and investment. So the future looks bright for a lot of places. I would say the West is in big, big trouble. But guys, if you ever want to know about this stuff, let me know, because this is kind of what I do in my personal life. And I've got my friend Raphael, wealthy expat, who I had on the podcast, and we talked all about this. I think it was episode 2 or 3, so go check that out if you're interested. But if you guys ever want to know about foreign investment, getting new passports, living abroad, what it's like dating abroad, anything like that, let me know in the comments, because I'll be more than happy to make more videos about this sort of stuff. John Raptus 7280 says, how do you avoid audience capture? That's a good question. I actually don't, but I do try and avoid it. Audience capture in the sense that you are told what to say, I think is a bad thing. And I always have my own opinions. My litmus test for that is every single time I say something in my videos and every single time I publish a video, I ask myself, do I mean what I said? Or am I trying to impress somebody? Or am I trying to appeal to the audience? And the answer to that has to be no, or else I don't publish the video. And I have a very, very strong moral compass. I have a very strong gut feeling about these sorts of things. And my gut feeling tends to be right pretty much 100% of the time if I ever feel like I've betrayed myself at all. So that's something that I've worked on for a long time. So audience capture in the sense that I say opinions based on what my audience think, that's not a problem. However, I make videos that my audience wants to see. There are many videos that I would love to make that I think that you guys wouldn't be so interested in. Like, I'm a big Liverpool fan. I'd love to make a video about how Liverpool FC are the greatest football club in the world, and about how Darwin Núñez just put on the most amazing performance that we've ever seen to sink Newcastle 2-1, and we had 10 men. I'd love to make that video, but I don't think you guys would get as much value from it. So audience capture, try not to get told what to say, but I do videos that you guys want to see. You guys love watching videos about Vivek Ramaswamy and Douglas Murray and these guys. So yeah, that's the sort of content that I do, and I love those videos. So it's a win-win. Dylan Bowers says, top 5 favorite influential books in your life. Oh, I don't read nearly as much as I should, to be honest, but top 5 books, I would say, 1984 by George Orwell probably has to be number one. I'm a big fan of the modern books, to be honest. War on the West by Douglas Murray was a massive one for me. Gad Saad's The Parasitic Mind, I think, should be mandatory reading. Even Michael Knowles' Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Mind, really enjoyed that book. And then another book by a guy called Rich Cooper. The book is called The Unplugged Alpha. And if you're a guy who is dating, unmarried, or even if you are married, it's just a good read to have. It's brutally honest, and I think that all young men kind of need to hear it. So I didn't think that one through. Definitely missed a lot of great books, but those 5 off the top of my head. Bucks BO says, can you do some long-form educational stuff as well as debate analysis? I would actually love to do that. Those videos don't tend to go down so well, and they're also very, very time-consuming in terms of my research. I have to spend days and days researching them. But because I like to put out content every day, I don't tend to do those videos as much. Just to be honest, if you look at the amount of time I'd have to put in and the much lower amount of views, it's not really that beneficial for me. And obviously I've got a business to run here, so I would do more of those videos. If you guys asked for them, if you guys requested it, and if you really wanted to see it, I would do it. But just for now, it's probably not high up on the priority list. Dear6341 says, do you feel more people are turning to the right because of extreme leftists? Yes. 100%. I think that there are a lot of people that have had their eyes woken up by the absolute just mess that is the left these days. And even people who are traditionally on the left, like Stephen Fry, you'd consider him kind of based these days because he believes in actual freedom of speech. People who believe in liberty and that people should have opinions, they're now considered extremists, and the left has just gone absolutely mad. So I think that the pendulum's swinging in a big way, and then perhaps one day it swings way too far to the right, and then, you know, we'll have to fight against that. It's probably pretty likely, but at the moment, it's definitely the absurdity and the madness is happening on the left. The right has its problems as well, but yeah, the pendulum has swung hugely to the left in our culture, and I think it's going to swing back in a very, very big way to the right, but time will tell. Shana Hendricks says, why Rattlesnake TV? Well, Rattlesnake is actually my boxing name. So it was my boxing fight name, Jake the Rattlesnake. I was actually working at a homeless shelter, the Salvation Army, for 2 years. And that's how I got this name. I was doing my first fight, and it was that week. And they said to me that if you don't have a nickname, they're going to make it for me. And I know the guy, he was a good friend of mine who was doing doing the names. And I know he'd call me like the Pixie or Fairy, or he'd, you know, make fun of me somehow. So I had to think of a name, and I went out to the homeless community, the guys who used to sit at the cafe, and I was saying, what should my boxing name be? And one of them comes out and goes, oi, you should just call yourself the Rattlesnake, bruh. How about Jake the Rattlesnake, bruh? And I was like, that's actually a pretty good idea. So thank you to PJ, wherever he is now. Hope he's doing well. And also just on that one, I thought that when I was making the channel, I didn't really want to pigeonhole myself. I didn't want to say X politics or X culture or X debates or anything like that. I just said Rattlesnake, and then we'll see where it takes me. We'll see what I'm really interested in. We'll see what my strengths and weaknesses are, and I can talk about a whole range of things. So I'm interested in so many different topics, as you guys have probably noticed, that I would hate to be constrained to one thing or the other. So it works. Dylan Taylor says, when has someone drastically changed your mind on an important topic? Shout outs to Dylan. Went on his podcast a few months ago, YouTuber's Guide to the Galaxy. Go check that one out. I'm actually going to give some shout outs as well to my boy JB for this one. Big ups to the Mandem. I'm going to go through his yard in Melbourne in a few months' time. I'm going to be there. But he changed my mind about Christianity. I was kind of entertaining the idea before we became really close friends a few years ago. And then he brought me along to his church a few times. And it really changed my mind about basically God and about embracing the church. I always thought that people who went to church were really weird, and that people who were really religious were all really weird. And I was nervous to go to the church because I was like, to me, it was like going to a cult or something. But I went, and they were all just super cool and friendly and intelligent and welcoming, and it was a very transformative experience. So big ups to man like JB. XO_Tracy says, what got you started? Have you always had these views, or was there a specific moment or event that led you to where you are at today in mindset and sharing your views? I would say that COVID was probably the biggest one. Starting boxing was also a very big one for me. I was actually living in a very debaucherous place in London called Hackney Wick at the time. And it was just sex, drugs, and rock and roll 24/7. If I never started boxing, I would probably be in a gutter somewhere right now. Almost guarantee you that. So those were very transformative for me. But in terms of political views, it would just have to be COVID because it opened up my eyes to everything. I went on a big rabbit hole of learning, and I think once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's very hard to go back. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but that would be my answer to that. Tizian45 says, do you have a signature move when it comes to boxing? I finished my first fight with an overhand right. He comes in with the jab. Oh, you put the right on the chin. Maybe I'll pull up a video from my Instagram for you.
Come on, Adrian. Oh, fuck.
So the referee thought he's had too much punishment. He wanted to spend the night. Nice little slip lift uppercut by Jake.
Oh, nice hook. Beautiful little rip as well by Jake. Good counter. It looked very good, Paul. He's got to keep it simple. Oh, nice right hand there. No, he's got good angles, doesn't he, Jake? He sort of throws out of his movement. There we go. Be first.
Mike DZA says, do you feel like Australia taking guns out of the hands of citizens was a positive or a negative on net balance? Absolutely 100% negative. We had, I think, one mass shooting and then they took them away. Australia doesn't have any massive problem with mental health like the United States has, as far as I know. And Australian people now are basically defenseless to government tyranny. I'm not sure if you guys are watching the news, but during COVID, the Victorian Premier Dan Andrews sent out riot police, and these guys in Australia, in the middle of Melbourne, were beating the shit out of people who had left their homes to just go and protest peacefully in the streets. These guys all blacked out with, rubber bullet guns and batons were beating the crap out of people. It was extremely alarming. But the point with that, guys, is the citizens of the US are armed, so police are much more hesitant to go and just throw their weight around like that. Police know in Australia that nobody's armed, so they can basically get away with whatever they want. So one day we might live to regret that. HS Funtime says, what has happened in Australia that terrified you that could happen in the US? Taking away the guns is probably the biggest one in that regard. A lot of the things that actually happen in the US happen in Australia a bit later. We tend to be downstream of the US. We're very different cultures. I'd say the apathy towards politics is pretty characteristic of Australia, but I can never see Americans doing that because Americans love politics. They see politics like a sport. That's why I comment on American politics and not Australian, because first of all, American politics affects Australian politics. What they do, we do. Or particularly American culture affects Australian culture. So I can't see Americans ever becoming apathetic about this like Australians do, but keep your guns, guys. Rhett says, is adding God back into the conversation redundant, dangerous even? What makes him useful? Good question. I think that, first of all, you can't remove God from the question. It's like saying, can you remove Elon Musk from the conversation about Tesla? There's always going to be questions about God. I don't think there's ever going to be a fully atheist world because, in my opinion, the way I see it, is that if that were to ever happen, people have an inclination towards worship. People want to worship something. They want to praise something. They'll end up worshiping politicians. They'll end up worshiping climate change. They'll end up worshiping celebrities. They'll end up worshiping social media. The religious instinct will always live on. So people are either going to worship superficial things and they're going to worship people who are inherently evil and flawed and fallen creatures, or they're going to worship something that is, at least if it's not real, if the atheists are right and there is no such thing as God, at least the idea of God is something that's all good. It's something to strive towards that you can basically never achieve as a human being. But if you shoot for the stars, you might land on the moon. Anyways, guys, that's it from me. Thank you so much for your questions. And once again, just thank you so much for your support with all of this. I really appreciate you all. If you guys want to check me out on Locals and jump in the community, that's going to be pumping soon, guys. I've got some big plans for that. Otherwise, chuck a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Love to have you here, part of the community. Thank you once again. And until next time, I'm Jake, RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.